I thought this week we would have a look at the gouache wash-off technique, or sometimes it's called gouache resist technique. So this is where you use gouache and ink, and what you end up is with something that looks a bit like a lino cut or a wood print. It's fascinating. What you need is a really resilient paper, because this is going to get washed underwater. So you need something that can take a little bit of abuse. This is a Bockingford £200. You'd probably get away with 140. Bockingford's good because it stands up to quite a lot of abuse. Wouldn't use anything terribly soft like a cardi paper. So just look for that. We need some gouache. Now gouache is water-based, it's not acrylic. We have to have a water-soluble paint or the technique won't work. It's basically watercolour with body in it, so it is opaque. Now that's a big white gouache, and I've got this set here. These are very cheap gouaches, if that's the plural of gouache, and some people call it gouache. I don't know what the correct pronunciation is, but it's gouache or gouache. Actually, that's rather nice. Anyway, very cheap stuff. You don't need colours if you don't want them. You can always get a big tube of white and tint it with your watercolours, or just do it all in white. Put the ink on, as we'll see, and then afterwards tint it with watercolour. So the crucial bit, big tube of white. Now, so we need gouache. We need some waterproof Indian ink. Now I've got a huge bottle. It's not expensive, but it has to be waterproof because the whole technique relies on the mixture of the water-soluble paint and the waterproof ink. If your Indian ink is old and a bit gummy and thick, you are going to struggle. So make sure it's relatively fresh. You could use a different colour if you wanted, as long as it's waterproof. However, I love the drama of the black line that we get, so I'm going to use Indian ink. And then finally, as I say, watercolours, if you need to tint your gouache, or if you want to do it all in black and white and paint it afterwards. Okay, what I would like to do is a painting of this wonderful cedar tree. This is a tree in Hurst where I live, and it's absolutely beautiful. I love the shape of these trees. So that's what I'm going to base my painting on. I have mixed up a whole load of colours. I am going to do a coloured one. So I've mixed up colours by tinting white gouache and have those all ready. I have also drawn out my tree onto here. Now this is a big piece of paper, so that's half a sheet of watercolour paper. I've never ever done this big. I would say probably start quite small. So the process is simple. Where you paint the gouache will be that colour. If you paint it white, at the end it will stay white. If you paint it blue, it will be blue. It will be far paler than this because you're going to wash half that off and you might just get a tint left. So when you see me painting, it will look like a child's painting. Hopefully it won't at the end. Where you leave exposed paper will be the colour of your ink. So in my case, exposed paper will be black. So the painted area is the colour of the paint. Exposed paper will be black. So with my tree, I really liked the arc of it. I've just decided I'm going to put a little frame round it. I have no idea why I decided it. I just thought it would sort of put it in, and rather than frame actually round the tree, I want the tree breaking it. I think this technique is quite graphic and I like that sort of setup. So I'm ready to go. If you remember, I said where we put the colour will be that colour. And that's even down to the point, if you say put some blue down and thought, oh, I don't like that colour, and put white on top, it might look white, but the blue is down at the paper and it's likely to leave that stain. So the first brush you put on is the colour you're likely to get at the end. So it's just worth bearing that in mind. My foliage, I'm going to do a mix of the purple and green. Purple in the shadows, green in the highlights, maybe a bit of the yellow in the for the sunlight. I don't know how this is going to work out. So I haven't done it in this way before, but hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I'm going to leave this frame to be black, so I will paint white in here, white out of there, and that should be fun. And I'm going to introduce some red into the trunk. Now that is quite a cool red, so I wonder if I have got a better, brighter red as well. This is vermilion, so it's far more like a cadmium red. I'm mixing up a lot of these colours. Oops, dry bit there, because I've got such a huge bit of paper. Obviously if you've got a smaller piece of paper, just adjust accordingly so that you don't end up wasting lots of paint at the end. Yeah, that's a bit more orangey, that might be a better colour. The feeling I want to get in my painting is slightly, oh I don't know, a 1930s type illustration, so it'll be interesting to see whether it ends up like that or something totally different. But hey, if you don't try, you never know. So let's start with this tree, this bit of the foliage. So I'm putting some yellow on because it's got some sunlight catching here. And then I'm going to put some green on. Say the painting at this point is going to look quite clunky, no beautiful blending, none of the lovely flows of colour that you get with watercolour. We're putting this on thick because this gouache is going to stop all that Indian ink actually getting to the paper and sticking. So if we put this on too thin, the whole endeavour will not work, and that would be a shame. I'm going to put a bit of purple shadow in there. So we've got a trunk. No, that's a branch, not a trunk. Do that in purple and red, and carry on working in that way. I need to cover the entire surface. Basically anything that I don't want the ink to get at, I jolly well need to cover. Any areas I leave, should I leave that, they will end up black. Now do you remember I said the first bit that hits the paper is the colour? If I put yellow on there, I don't think that will stain underneath because the green was on first. So you've almost got to sort of think of some of that order. Say I didn't like the shape of that and I came up with white, the green will still be there first. So I just need to be a little bit careful of what I do. But this is an experiment. You don't learn if you're not prepared to make mistakes. So obviously if this is a total mess, I shall just delete the video and you'll never know. But if it doesn't turn out to be that beautiful 1930s style illustration, but I still like it, brilliant. Well, then I've learned, haven't I? So I think a little spirit of adventure is never a bad thing. Well, it's absolutely vital. It's crucial to learning and growing as an artist. If you always do the safe stuff, one, you'll probably get bored, but two, you'll never learn. So I'm going to carry on doing this, and I'll come back when I either get to a more interesting part or I'm pretty much finished. Right, I've finished painting now, and as I warned you, it does look really sort of childish and clunky. That's because I put the gouache on pretty thickly, and that's just the process. Let's have a little look here. Sorry, the light's coming in, which of course is lovely. So that's what it looks like. What you can't see is that I have painted white gouache all over the background, and that's to keep the paper dry. Keep the paper white. I am hoping that some of the ink will go through and I'll get little flecks of black to make it look like a lino print. I now need to make this or let this dry totally. It has to be bone dry. Then I'm going to coat it with ink, which is a really scary part of it. Let that totally dry, and then the fun bit, we wash the ink off. All the gouache is now dry. Just check any thick bits to make sure it is thoroughly dry. If it is wet, it will dissolve in the Indian ink when you put it on. You probably be best actually supporting it on a bit of a board for this. You need to have your Indian ink and a soft large brush. You can use a watercolour brush because it'll wash out straight away, so that's fine. And you need to put Indian ink right across your piece to ensure that it's all covered, but try and do it in one pass so that you don't muddle up that gouache. If you want to just double check that you have got gouache in all the right places, hold your piece up to the light and it will be easier to see. Right, this is the moment of truth. Single pass. If the edges are important to you, make sure you catch them. And actually I think it would be nice to have it go right to the edges, because I know I didn't put my gouache right to the edge, so we'll end up with a nice black frame. It uses quite a lot of ink. I can see that. Look, I've almost used up the ink that I've dispensed. So try and do it in one pass. Obviously, if there's an area that you have missed, do a quick touch up. I use a lot more than I was anticipating. So let's put that out. You may well be doing a smaller piece, so just put out what is appropriate for your size of work. Just touch that up. Right, oh, this is very scary because you end up with a black piece of paper obscuring all the work you have done, and you may well have done it far more precisely than I did. Oh, missed a total line there. So you really do need to be careful that you don't muddle up what has gone before. So I'm just doing all the way right to the bottom, and then this is going to dry, actually in this case overnight. I think I said, oh, I'll leave the gouache overnight. Oh, I was impatient, couldn't do that. So I'm going to leave this overnight. Now I need to wash the brush and the pot straight away, because if that dries in your brush, it's waterproof and it will ruin it. Well, this is exciting. This is my painting, all covered in black ink that's dried overnight. And I have a few brushes to try and get the ink off. I'm hoping it will come off just with some watercolour little brush. Might need something a bit stiffer. All else fails, I'm going to go for the big scrubby brush. I have an apron on. I have cleared my surfaces because this could get mucky. Who knows? I'm going to start with cold water, and then if that doesn't work, I'll go on to warm water. So, oh look, can you see it's coming off? So the idea is that the water dissolves the gouache and takes the ink with it. The ink should only stick where it's gone onto the paper, where it will have bonded properly. Now this is looking quite stripy, isn't it? Initial thoughts. So I think I'm going to have to work quite hard. So there, which I know is the trunk. I think it's going to work. But I think, say, it's going to take some effort to get ink off. I want to be careful because I don't want to wash too much of the colour away. Otherwise it'll be too faded. Oh, this is exciting. I dreamt about this last night, so I really want to see whether it works. I think it's going to. You can see why you need really resilient paper. It's something soft and delicate would not cope with this. You could also, rather than just doing this under a running tap, I guess you could also, depending on the size of your piece, use a washing up bowl, you could do it in the bath for that matter, see how you get on. So I'm going to take off the easy stuff first and then work out what needs slightly harsher treatment. But that's coming off nice and easily. So it definitely is quite stripy, so I guess I put on the ink in thicker places as I did my stripes. But I hope you will forgive me for that. So that's what it looks like at the moment. So I'm going to stop and start working in to these stripes to see what happens to get those off. Right, you can see that I've started cleaning up this area. And I realised why it is good to have it under running water, because if you just say loosen some of the ink and it sits on the paper, there is a danger that you'll end up with grey paper because it'll start to sink into the cleaned off areas, so you definitely don't want to do that. So as I say, I wouldn't particularly want to lose all these little flecks of black. Again, it's going to be your taste and your decision. Definitely need to clean up around here. If you remember, I left this black frame, so I know that's not going to shift because that was onto the untouched paper. Let's see, like this, that line across needs to go. Quite like some of that there. Don't like that line there. So let's try and get rid of some of that. And then just clean up the top of the tree as well. Yeah, it's coming off really easily, which is great. I wasn't sure. And it has left the stain of the colours, which I'm pleased about. Again, I thought it might be paler than this. But if you remember, I said, oh, I quite fancied a vintage illustration sort of look to it. And by some miracle, I think we may have achieved it. Never done one this big. It's quite unwieldy. What you can do is dry it totally, and if you little flecks of black you don't like, you can scrape them off with a very sharp scalpel, so that's another possibility. And of course, if you want more black, you could always go in with a little more ink. So I think that's enough at the moment. The paper's starting to feel quite tired. I'm going to put that in the sunshine to dry and then make a decision what more to do. But I'm quite excited by that. The painting has dried very quickly in the gorgeous sunshine, and I've rubbed out as many pencil lines as I could. I can see lines if I look carefully, which is a bit annoying, but I'm not sure I can rub them all out. Can try. So it's time to think, what don't I like, what do I like, what can I do about it? So I like these dark edges. I think it needs to be darker here and probably a bit round this bottom corner. I like some of this dark in here, so I might put a bit more in just to balance up. Gone a bit grey and spludgy there, so I'm going to just sort that out. Might want to make the top of the tree a little stronger, and I'll just go back to my initial reference and see. Actually, this tree is flat, but I just think it needs something a bit stronger there. I'm going to leave the colours as is. When you do this technique, you could, with watercolour now, go in and strengthen the colours. I don't want to do that, but absolutely could. If you'd done it all black and white, you could then tint it. So, you know, you have choices. The main thing, I think, is to sort out some of these edges. So I've got a little bit of the Indian ink. I think it's going to be really important for it not to look like I've touched it up. So I need to get my marks looking, as far as possible, broken and like the marks that were made by the gouache wash off. So I might do that. I say I'm just trying to disguise where it's gone a bit mushy. That's probably too heavy, but I'm going to come back in as well as with this brush and ink, but with a pen for smaller, more delicate marks. So that's fine. I'll sort that all out. And I think I said down this bottom corner needs strengthening. actually. That's a good idea. If you dry brush, so drag your brush on the side, it breaks up a little. That's quite a decent mark. I like these little marks. I like particularly the more solid ones, and for example I think that could be a little more solid, and that could as well. Maybe you can extend that one. Now you might think this is cheating because you're touching it up. I absolutely don't think it's cheating. But you know, your decision. I do think that does. Yeah, I quite like the idea of dry brushing this. So in fact, if I do that there, look, it quite nicely breaks up the edges. But I've just got to be careful not to overdo it because I don't want people to realise I've cheated. So with the dry brushing, best thing actually is to take off excess like that. Now I really like where some of the black has joined and made interesting shapes within the branches, so I may well go back in. Let's rinse that ink off that pen, because obviously if it dries on your watercolour brushes you're not going to get it out. Move that out of the way before I stick my elbow in it. Now I want to get these, say, interesting shapes within the branches, like I like how that has joined on, and like how these are here. So if I want to do a bit more of that again, just trying to make sure that it doesn't look like I've gone back in with the pen. Of course, if that's a style you want, you could do pen work on top. You know, all depends on the subject, your preference, what happened when you washed it off. You know, pleasant surprise or nasty surprise. Yeah, actually that's better. I sort of join that on. Yeah, that's better. I do like, I say, these sort of shapes within shapes. You mustn't go too over the top. If you wanted this absolutely pristine white, you'd have to put your gouache on probably quite thick to make sure nothing sank through, or as I say, scrape off with a sharp blade, a scalpel. But I knew all along I wanted some of these black marks. Say it's just these ones I'm not overly fond of, but tough, I think, is the has to be there. Right, do you know what? I think, oh, if I just join that I am probably done. I have really enjoyed this, and I am pretty happy with how it turned out for such a large piece. I wanted the feeling of that sort of vintage illustration to feel like a woodcut, lino cut, and it has. The colours are a bit but I think there's a danger of me mucking them up if I went back in and started tinting. So I'm going to be patient and not do that. Like this, if I was doing it again, I really like having the black within the leaves. Now I could do that sort of artificially, say something like that, but again it's actually very hard to make a mark look not deliberate, which is what I'm working on doing at this point. To make a mark look random is a real effort. This is random because it was, but to make these marks look random, I think maybe a struggle, and a struggle too far. So I need to not overdo it and lose the freshness and the charm of the process. Ta-da! That is my cedar tree done with the gouache resist technique, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. That's a lot of fun. It's a brilliant technique, lovely for those sort of graphic designs, something really strong. You can be far more precise. If you want to see it done precisely, Google and you'll find lovely precise stuff. Not my just not what I want to do, but you can find that if you like it, and I would love to see what you get up to. So take care, and I'll try and come up with another lesson for next week. Bye for now.